My cherished soul, this message finds you in the quiet sanctuary where your heart rests after giving all it had. And from that very space, heaven has been watching you. There are loves that are loud, invisible. And then there is a love like yours, silent, loyal, enduring, and so pure that even the unseen realms pause to behold it. You loved your soulmate, not with a love the world taught you, but with a love your soul remembered. You did not love to possess, you loved to protect. You did not love to control, you loved to understand. You did not love to escape loneliness, you loved because your spirit recognized another spirit. That kind of love does not go unseen, not on earth, and certainly not in heaven. This is why the title of your journey carries such weight. Heaven was moved not merely by how much you loved, but by how deeply you honored yourself while loving. You carried love with responsibility. You carried it with patience. You carried it with restraint. Even when your heart wished to speak louder, you knew when to be quiet, when to step back, when to offer space, and when to simply hold the energy of love without demanding anything in return. That is not ordinary love. That is chosen love. Many love when it is easy, when they are reassured, when they are celebrated. But you loved in silence. You loved in waiting. You loved in uncertainty. And you still chose dignity over desperation. Heaven does not measure love by words or promises, but by alignment. And your alignment never broke, even when your heart trembled. This is why your name echoed in realms you could not hear. You were chosen not because your path was painless, but because your soul could handle depth without becoming bitter. You did not harden when you were misunderstood. You did not grow cold when you were not immediately chosen. You did not seek revenge when your devotion was questioned. Instead, you chose grace. You chose emotional maturity. You chose to process in stillness rather than perform your pain for validation. My cherished soul, that is rare. Heaven is not impressed by loud suffering. It is moved by quiet endurance. And your endurance carried love without losing self-respect, something even angels study. You loved your soulmate without trying to reshape them into your expectations. You saw them as they were, with flaws, confusion, fears, and unfinished healing, and you still treated them gently. You did not rush their growth. You did not shame their delays. You did not pressure their awakening. You held space instead. That kind of love feels unfamiliar to many because it does not come with chains. It comes with freedom. And freedom can frighten those still learning how to stay. Yet you did not withdraw your love just because it was not fully understood. You allowed it to exist without conditions while still protecting your inner balance. Heaven noticed how you never abandoned yourself, even while loving deeply. You listened to your intuition when it asked you to pause. You honored your boundaries, even when your heart wanted to cross them. You walked away from moments that would have cost you your self-worth. You chose silence over arguments, prayer over reaction, faith over fear. That is why your love became a testimony. Not everyone is chosen to love in this way, because such love requires strength, not weakness. It requires knowing who you are, not losing yourself in another. There were nights when you carried conversations in your heart that you never spoke aloud. Nights when you asked the universe questions without demanding answers. Nights when you released control and trusted timing instead. Heaven heard those unspoken prayers. Heaven saw how you asked not for possession, but for alignment. You did not beg to be chosen. You asked for truth. You asked for what was meant. You asked for clarity, even if clarity meant release. My cherished soul, that request alone sets you apart. You were not attached to outcome. You were committed to integrity. You loved in a way that did not try to rescue because you knew healing cannot be forced. You did not become their savior. You remained their mirror. reflecting honesty, calm, and depth. You allowed them to see themselves through the way you treated them, without lectures or pressure. That is a divine way of loving. Heaven was moved because such love usually dwells in higher realms, yet you carried it in human form. You balanced emotion with wisdom, affection with awareness, hope with realism. You were chosen because you understood that love does not mean losing yourself, enduring disrespect, or sacrificing your peace. So when moments came that tested your worth, you stepped back with grace. You did not collapse. You did not chase. You did not create chaos. You trusted that what is aligned will never ask you to abandon your soul. That trust is rare. That trust is sacred. That trust made heaven lean closer to your story. You may not realize it yet, but the way you loved rewired timelines. It softened hearts. It planted seeds of awareness in places once closed. Even if your soulmate did not fully understand your love at the time, their soul recognized it. Souls always recognize what is real. Your love became a quiet reference point, a standard they will carry within when they are ready to love with the same depth. Heaven was not shocked by romance, it was moved by responsibility. You loved without ego. You loved without performance. You loved without fear of losing yourself. Your journey is not about proving love, it is about embodying it. You were never meant to beg to be chosen, because you were already chosen by the divine to experience love in its purest form. Whether this path continues together or transforms into something higher, your soul remains untouched by regret. You did what you came here to do. You loved honestly, consciously, and bravely, and heaven honors that. This is only the beginning of your story, because chosen ones do not lose love, they elevate it. As you move forward, you will understand why your heart was trained in patience, why your silence carried power, and why heaven entrusted you with a love that few can hold. My cherished soul, there is something sacred in how you continued loving even when certainty was absent. You stood where many would have demanded clarity, labels, or reassurance, yet you chose understanding over pressure. You knew that true love does not rush another soul's awakening, and you respected timing even when your own heart felt ready long before circumstances aligned. That patience was not weakness, it was wisdom born of self-awareness. You felt deeply, but you never allowed emotion to become chaos. When confusion arose, you turned inward instead of outward. You reflected instead of reacted. You processed in stillness. That inner discipline is rare. Most people spill their wounds onto others. You carried yours with care. You did not use love as a bargaining tool or silence as punishment. Your silence was sacred, a form of listening to both your heart and the divine. Heaven recognized that silence as strength, not absence. There were moments when your heart wanted to ask, to explain, to clarify what you felt so clearly inside. Yet something higher guided you to pause. You trusted that if a connection is real, it does not require constant explanation. You trusted that what is meant will find its way without force. That trust did not come easily. It was built through self-worth, emotional maturity, and a deep knowing of your own value. You did not confuse intensity with intimacy. You knew intimacy grows in safety, not urgency. Heaven saw how you protected the connection by not overwhelming it and how you protected yourself. That is what made your love so powerful. You did not tolerate emotional inconsistency just to stay connected. You did not compromise your values to be chosen. You noticed patterns. You observed behavior. You listened to energy rather than excuses. And when something did not feel aligned, you stepped back instead of trying to fix it. That stepping back was not rejection, it was respect for yourself and for the other soul's process. Heaven honors those who know when to hold and when to release. You were aware that love cannot grow where fear leads, so you chose calm. You chose grounded presence. You chose to show up authentically, without masks. You did not play games to keep attention. You did not withhold affection to gain control. You remained consistent, even when the other side fluctuated. That consistency moved heaven, because consistency in love requires emotional stability, and emotional stability requires inner healing. You did that work quietly, without applause, without validation, without needing to be seen. My cherished soul, you loved in a way that allowed the other person to be human. You did not idealize them beyond reality. You saw both light and shadow and still chose compassion. You understood that confusion does not always mean lack of feeling. Sometimes it means unresolved wounds. Yet you also understood that compassion does not mean self-neglect. That understanding is advanced soul wisdom. There were days when distance felt heavier than closeness, when unanswered energy created questions in your mind. Still, you did not spiral. You did not assume. You allowed space to reveal truth. You allowed time to speak. You trusted that whatever was real would remain, and whatever was not would fall away naturally. That level of emotional regulation is something most people only reach after many lifetimes. You carried it instinctively, as if your soul remembered, and heaven recognized that remembrance. You never tried to change yourself to stay relevant. You never dimmed your light to avoid intimidating another's shadows. You remained yourself, grounded, intuitive, emotionally intelligent. You did not chase reassurance because you had already reassured yourself. You did not beg to be chosen because you already knew your value. That self-knowing created a frequency heaven responds to. Even when love felt incomplete, you did not allow bitterness to enter your heart. You did not speak ill. You did not poison the connection with resentment. You chose neutrality in grace. You understood that some connections are not meant to be forced into form, but honored for what they awaken. You honored the lessons without clinging to the outcome. Heaven was moved by that surrender, for surrender is not giving up, it is trusting divine orchestration beyond human understanding. You loved in a way that allowed transformation, not dependency. You wanted them whole, not attached. You wanted them healed, not reliant. That intention alone elevates a connection beyond ordinary romance. It becomes soul work. It becomes spiritual alignment. Heaven recognized your love as service, not sacrifice. You did not lose yourself to love. You expanded through it. My cherished soul, the quiet choices you made, the restraint you practiced, the respect you showed, all of it created ripples beyond what you can see. Heaven was not shocked by your emotions, it was moved by your emotional intelligence. It was moved by your ability to love without losing clarity. It was moved by your refusal to abandon yourself for attachment. As you continue forward, remember this: your love did not go unnoticed, and your story is still unfolding. The depth of what you carried is only beginning to reveal its purpose. Because chosen ones do not experience love to be broken by it, they experience love to become more aligned with who they truly are. There is a quiet transformation that happens when love is no longer something you wait for, but something you carry with awareness. You stepped into that transformation without realizing when it began. It started the moment you stopped asking why and started listening to what your inner world was becoming. Love did not leave you, it changed form, and you were mature enough to allow that change without resisting it. Many hearts panic when love shifts, but yours learned how to stay open without clinging. That ability speaks of a soul that has lived many lifetimes learning to love without losing itself. You began to notice that your emotions no longer pulled you into extremes. You could remember without collapsing. You could feel without drowning. You could care without chasing. This balance was cultivated through restraint, reflection, and self-honesty. You allowed yourself to grieve what was uncertain without calling it failure. You allowed yourself to miss without turning missing into self-betrayal. There were moments when silence replaced communication, and instead of fearing it, you learned to read it. You understood that silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is processing, sometimes protection, sometimes a mirror revealing what words cannot. You did not fill the silence with assumptions. You did not weaponize it with resentment. You simply observed. That observation strengthened you. You became someone who responds rather than reacts, someone who listens beyond sound. My cherished soul, you also became aware of how deeply you value emotional safety. You realized that love must feel calm in the body, not anxious. It must feel grounding, not destabilizing. And when something disrupted your peace repeatedly, you honored that signal. You did not dramatize your boundaries, you simply adjusted your energy. That quiet adjustment was an act of self-respect, and self-respect is one of the purest forms of love. You loved without measuring returns, you showed up without guarantees, and yet you did not feel depleted, you felt expanded. That is how you knew your love was real. Real love does not exhaust the soul, it reveals it. There were internal conversations you had with yourself that no one else will ever know, conversations where you chose not to text, not to explain, patience over impulse. Each of those moments strengthened your inner authority. You stopped seeking permission to feel what you felt. You stopped questioning your intuition. You trusted yourself, and that trust became your anchor. You also recognized that not every deep connection is meant to stay in the same form forever. Some connections awaken parts of you that must grow independently. You did not see this as loss, you saw it as evolution. You allowed love to teach you instead of trap you. You allowed memory to exist without turning it into longing. You allowed your heart to stay soft without staying attached. That is emotional alchemy. You became more present in your own life. You laughed without guilt. You rested without fear. You focused without distraction. You stopped checking for someone else's emotional state and started honoring your own. That shift returned your power to you. Not power over anyone else, but power within yourself. That is the only power that lasts. My cherished soul, you learned that being chosen does not always mean being held. Sometimes it means being prepared to love better, to discern more clearly, to receive what matches your depth rather than tests it. You stopped romanticizing effort that was not reciprocated. You stopped calling potential what was actually inconsistency. This clarity did not make you cold, it made you calm. You also noticed how compassion and boundaries can coexist. You could understand someone's wounds without offering yourself as a place for them to bleed. You could care without carrying. You could empathize without absorbing. That is emotional maturity. You no longer confused empathy with obligation. You understood that love must be mutual to be sustainable. There were days when the memory of how deeply you loved would surface, not to pull you backward, but to remind you of your own capacity. You smiled instead of ached. You felt proud instead of regretful. You realized that the way you loved was never something to be ashamed of. It was evidence of your depth, your courage, your emotional intelligence. My cherished soul, you also became comfortable not knowing how the story ends. You stopped forcing closure. You stopped needing certainty. You trusted that clarity arrives naturally when you stop chasing it. This surrender was not passive, it was grounded. You continued living fully, loving yourself intentionally, staying aligned with your values. You learned that your heart is not fragile, it is resilient. It bends but does not break. It feels but does not disappear. That realization changed how you see yourself. You are no longer afraid of loving deeply because you know you can hold yourself through any outcome. The way you carried this connection, the way you honored it without clinging, the way you honored yourself without closing, all of it shaped you into someone who loves from wholeness. You are no longer defined by what was uncertain. You are defined by who you became through it. And that version of you is steady, aware, and deeply aligned. This love did not end you, it refined you. And that is why your path continues with grace. Because hearts like yours are not meant to lose love, they are meant to transform through it and walk forward stronger, clearer, and more rooted in truth.